In our series on large abandoned projects in New Orleans, we looked at languishing properties owned or leased by one developer, Joe Yeager.
Well, now our David Hammer investigation looks at what the city is doing to address that problem.
Developer Joe Yeager has held on to some of the largest abandoned properties in town for years with little or no progress. The blighted Plaza Tower skyscraper, the decommissioned Navy base in the Bywater, the rundown former Mercy Hospital in Mid-City, the dilapidated old Market Street power plant on the river. He didn't want to go on camera, but he did agree to be recorded so he could explain why his bigger projects often get delayed. Why don't those projects come to fruition?
Number one, you've got to get an outside lender.
Commercial real estate broker Reed Wiley says it's not just financing that delays big projects. He also says New Orleans has a more complicated layered construction approval process than other cities.
We just have historically been a little bit slower to do business. Even if you go one parish over, business speeds up a little bit.
But while New Orleans throws up obstacles to redevelopment, it also has a tendency of treating big developers with kid gloves when it comes to blight. For example, Yeager had owned the Plaza Tower for 7 years before debris flew off the top of the 45-story building last year and struck a passerby. At a press conference in the shadow of the tower that day, City Safety and Permits Director Tammy Jackson tried to explain why the city had not fined Yeager for a bevy of code violations.
No, we don't have any fines against the building, but with large-scale projects like this, we know it takes some time.
The city did finally issue $4,000 in fines at Plaza Tower, but Yeager is challenging them in court.
Change out all the windows in the building. You know, give me a break. We're not going to do that. We'll fight you in court.
State Representative Amy Adato Freeman thinks the city's code enforcement needs more teeth.
My frustration is that what I'm learned is that Safety and Permits has the ability to find these people who are having blighted properties or not following permits, but they're not actually taking those fees to the highest extent.
But Paul Flower says more fines are the last thing developers like him need to get languishing projects off the ground. He bought the old Mercy Hospital from Yeager last year and is trying to raise $110 million to redevelop it as an elder care center.
Please understand that if I knew I was going to have to pay fines on this until I could bring it to financial closing, I'd have never been involved in it.
Wiley says the balance between incentives and punishment is a delicate one.
You know, the people that are willing to invest into our communities and the ones that are wanting to do that development, we obviously want to reward that. We want to work hand in hand with those developers, but you do want to, motivate, if you will, or get people towards development.
At the same time, city records show more than 700 individual homeowners have been fined for blight in the last 2 years. And some are assessed higher blight fines than the major developers are.
We got fined $7,000 for this building over here.
Brobson Lutz owns the French Quarter home where Tennessee Williams once lived and says he was fined by the Vieux Carré Commission for code violations he described as small.
One of them was there was a fern growing on the wall. Another was you've got a mailbox that was not approved. Well, that mailbox had been in there before Tennessee Williams bought it.
Across the street from Lutz sit 3 abandoned properties: the old Marty's restaurant, an apartment complex, and a historic shotgun. All have sat vacant for years with no fines. All are owned by, that's right, Joe Yeager.
I'd like to see the block come back to life. We've got a dead block and Joe Yeager's the undertaker.
Why is that sitting vacant for years?
Marty's, I ought to sell it. I renovated all those things, and I didn't want to put tenants in there to destroy what I've created there.
Yeager says his properties are empty but not blighted. The Vieux Carré Commission cited the Marty's building for demolition by neglect in 2021, but levied no fine. Freeman says nothing will change if the city doesn't enforce code uniformly for everyone.
Old New Orleans way of doing business needs to go. It needs to be, okay, we're just going to make sure that we enforce the same across the board and do it fairly.
David Hammer, Eyewitness News.
Well, developers and critics alike say the city needs to come up with a clear plan for redeveloping large properties, set clear timelines for developers, and stick to them.